So I just wanted to share with you guys how to use textures for your fine art photography. Um, you know, they can enhance your edit and they can enhance, just make your background look more interesting. It can give it a more painterly feel. You can stack textures. I mean, it's really endless possibilities with textures. You can change the blending modes. You can change their color, their brightness, their contrast, really anything that you can do with a photograph, changing, you know, hue, saturation, all that you can do with a texture because it's essentially an image as well. So you can really manipulate it any way you need to change the look of it. Sometimes you might use a texture and you're like, well, I don't know, it doesn't look right, but you can play with it and maybe mess around with it enough to where it's doing what you want it to. So anyway, let me go ahead and move this part of the screen for a second so I can, okay, all right. So yeah, I have a ballerina here. And you know, she's against a gray seamless backdrop. I did a little bit of editing to it just initially, like a little dodge and burn and just some cleaning up of the hair and whatnot. But essentially, it's very close to just an straight out of camera raw image. And you know, I might want to add some textures just to make that background a little bit more interesting. So let me grab a file here. Part of it. Move this out of the way. Okay, so you might not see that, but anyway, I have some textures here. I'm going to use. I have a few texture packs I have, and you know, I'm just going to look through and see, you know, what might look good on this. And a lot of times, I mean, everything is very organic for me. I don't know what the final product is going to look like, so I just play around and see what looks good. So here's a leaf image or a leaf texture. Let's see what this looks like. And you know, if I don't like it, I'm just gonna change it and try something else. So you know, because it's a horizontal image, I can always turn this around so it fits better. And then and all I did was drag it into place, and I'm just gonna move it. And I'm going to hit shift and then I'm going to hold the corner and I'm just going to drag the corner out to fit the image. And I'm hitting enter. And now I'm going to change the blending modes. I almost never use a texture at normal blending mode. I mean, you can lower the opacity, and that's an important thing with textures is I almost never use them at 100% opacity. So I'm always using low opacity depending on, you know, the look I want. So I can lower the opacity and see how this looks in normal mode. And like I said, usually I don't use normal mode, so I'm going to play around. And my go-to is soft light. That's my go-to. So I usually try that first. Sometimes I'll go with overlay, and sometimes the difference is very subtle. You can hardly tell. And then if those don't look right, I might play with some other ones. And then, you know, I may decide, you know, I may not want this texture. So I also want to make sure I'm not missing your messages if you're sending them. Hi, Rose Alba. Cool. Okay. So in this case, okay, I have soft light. I'm going to change the opacity a little bit. Maybe bring it up a bit. And let's play with this, see what we can get. I'm going to now textures that are, you know, obviously will come over your subject. Couple of different things you can do with that. In some cases, you can leave it on your subject, depending on the look you're wanting. If you don't, there's a few ways to remove that texture. Now, because this texture has very little color on it, if we turn this layer off and on, it's not affecting the overall color of our subject very much. So a couple of things we can do. We can erase the texture off of her. We can use a mask and then use a black brush to erase. Because our mask is white, we can use a black brush at, you know, maybe low flow, a soft brush, and then just start you know, painting it off of her if we want. We can do that. Or another thing we can do is we can select her as a mask and completely, you know, mask her out by using the subject select tool. I think that's what it's called. And it's really, I started using it and it's really accurate. It's really, really good. So let's try that real quick. If you haven't tried it yet, I'm going to turn off our texture for a second. And I don't think I need to duplicate my background in this case, but I will. I always like to duplicate it just because I don't like messing up my background layer in case I do make a mistake. So I'm going to take this over here. This tool is the object selection tool. Okay, and then up here, I'm going to hit select subject. And it does a really good job at selecting our subject. I mean, it's really, besides some of these little fringes, it got all of her, which is great. So I'm going to play with that for a second. I'm going to come up here to select and mask. And I'm going to, oops, just a second. I'm going to feather the mask a little bit, and I had the color of the mask to red, and I can't remember how to get that back now. I don't know why it turned off. Well, let's just go to output settings, and we're going to output it to, I'm just going to go with a new layer with new layer mask, and I'm going to hit OK. Now, see what it did? There's a mask of the ballerina right here. So what I can do is I can take that texture, hit the Option key on my Mac, and if you have a PC, I'm not sure what the equivalent of Option is, probably Alt, but you click on, if you're on a Mac, click Option and you drag that mask up, and then you're going to say replace the layer mask, say yes, but in this case, the texture is only on her, so we need to invert that mask. So I inverted the mask, and now very quickly I've taken the texture off of her, and now it's just strictly on the background. So that's another way you can mask off textures from a subject. And then what's nice about it is if I want to try some, you know, different textures, I can just drag this mask up using the Option key to different layers, and then trying, you know, different layers or different textures very quickly without having to erase it off of her. So that's another way to take the texture off. So, you know, I like this. If, you know, because she's on the floor here and that texture is coming all the way down the floor, it may not look, I don't know, it may not look realistic. So I can also take it off the floor and just have it on the background. So on this layer mask, I could just take a black brush, maybe at a low opacity. Maybe I just want it at a lower opacity on the floor. And I can start to softly brush some of that off the floor. Maybe it's a little too low. Here we go. So, you know, maybe now it looks a little more realistic, so it's not on the floor, or maybe you can add a different texture on the floor, like an actual, this is a wood floor maybe, or, you know, do something different for the ground if you wanted to. Okay, so that's one way. I'm going to also show you another way to take textures off of a subject. So anyway, just, you know, just to talk about how textures work, if you have a gray background, that's where your textures will probably work the best, because the medium gray is not affecting, you know, color, and they work really well depending on your initial background, and it can look different on different colored backgrounds. So you also want to play with that. Let's stack another texture on here just to see what we can get. Oh, hi, Rosalinda. Sorry, I think, you know, I am recording this, Rosalinda, and, you know, if you don't see it in Facebook later, it should save it, and if not, I will, I'll upload it. Okay. All right, so let me grab another texture. Let's see. So I've got some monochrome textures here, and let's try stacking another one on and see what we get. Yeah, it doesn't have to be exact. You can just, oops, sorry. My Photoshop's really slow. It's slow because I'm zooming and recording and doing all this stuff. It's like, I can't keep up. Okay. All right, so here we have another texture. I'm gonna change this to soft light and see how it looks. And let's turn off the leaf one just to see how this looks. And in this case, you know, instead of dragging the, hi Dean, hi Kelly. Instead of dragging this layer mask up, I'm going to use another technique to erase the texture off of her. One way is to take the lasso tool and to feather it about 20 pixels. And I'm going to select the subject, and it doesn't need to be perfect, but you know, get as close as you can. Sorry, my hands are like really wobbly, and I'm standing up instead of sitting down, and I think my hands wobbly over that way. Okay, so I'm just selecting. Okay, now there's this space here. I'm going to hit the Option key, and I'm going to take this space out because I don't want that to be included. Hi, Donna Maria. Mary, you asked, was your dancer photographed on a canvas background? What size is it? So actually, this is just gray seamless paper, and it's a 12-foot wide seamless. So it's not canvas. Okay, so now after I've selected the subject with the lasso tool, I'm going to go up to, I'm sorry, you probably can't see my menu at the top, but I'm going up to Filter, Blur, Average. And that's another way to take the texture off of your subject. Now, if I wanted to leave some of the texture on her, immediately after I do that, I go up to Edit, Fade Average, and then I can fade the amount of texture back in. Okay, so I could, because, you know, if this skirt is sheer, you would see a little bit of that texture coming through. So, you know, maybe just have a little bit of that coming through. And then I hit OK. And I didn't get it very good down here, but I just wanted to give you an idea of how to use that tool. It's really useful. And again, I don't use my textures at 100%. I'm going to lower the opacity and just, you know, whatever amount seems right. 50%, just a little bit. And that's the key to using textures is, Jody, yes, you can brush it off with opacity, and I will show you that in just a second. But the key to using textures is to make it really subtle. If you keep it 100%, that's when it looks fake. So make sure you know, play with the opacity enough to where you can see its subtle texture and it gives it that character, but it's not too strong where it looks photoshopped or it looks fake. Okay. Yeah, so someone asked about, you know, brushing the texture off, and I'm going to show you an example of that. I'm going to turn that one off for a second. Let me grab a different texture. Just a second. Let's see. I want to use something with color so I can show you. I don't know if this one's going to work for this image, but let's try it real quick. Sorry, my computer's slow. Okay. Okay, I'm going to change the soft light. Now, when you have a texture that has color, and if I turn this off and on, you will see that that texture is giving her, because it's a greenish texture, it's giving her a green hue, okay? Now, that can be fine. You know, you can do that if you want that color, or, so we can do a couple things. We can change the color of the texture, or we can leave it. Now, someone asked brushing the texture off, so if I put in a layer mask, and with a black brush, start brushing this off, I'll show you what happens. So when I start to brush it off, the problem is, especially in this case, she has a sheer dress. Her color tone now doesn't quite go with the texture in the background, because that texture has a greenish color. She's now, you know, we take it off, now she looks more red, and you can tell that it's being, you know, it's not real, because now what do we do with the skirt? You know, we could kind of, you know, it just doesn't, it doesn't look right. And then it's hard to get all, you know, get exactly around all these little edges in your fingers. It's hard to get, you know, you have to zoom in, and it's really hard to do that with precision, right? So to me, that doesn't look very good. It looks fake. Even if we lower the opacity, I don't know, it might work, but the best way to take, it's okay, Rosalinda. Uh-oh, I hope I'm still on. It will, it'll be recorded and you'll see it later. So guys, let me know if you lost me. I don't think I think I'm still on. I just got a weird message that said I was signed out. So hopefully I'm still here. Let me just make sure. I think so. Can everyone still see and hear me? Just let me know. Okay, good. Thanks. Thanks, Lisa. All right. So again, this, like I said, this is a way you can take the texture off, but I recommend either using that object selection tool, which is a lot more precise and it's a lot faster, or the method I showed you a little bit ago, which I'm going to delete the layer mask. And like I said, you use the lasso tool, and you don't have to be exact, but you know, get as close as you can. And what happens in this case is it erases the texture off of her, but it keeps that color tone. And that's what holds your image together, is if your subject is matching the color tone of the texture, then it ties it in together much better. And then this little area, I'm going to use an option. I'm going to take this part out because I don't want it to affect that. And again, I'm going to go up to Filter, Blur, Average. Now the texture's off of her, but she retained that color tone of that texture because it's a greenish. Now if I turn it on and off, you'll see. Actually, let me bring up the opacity. See how she has the same coloring as that texture because I used that other method. And of course, if I lower the opacity, the effect is not as strong. But now it fits better because she's taking on the color tone of that texture. Another thing we can do with texture, let's say we really like this texture, but we don't like the color. So we can do a couple things. We can either come up here to like hue saturation and use a clipping mask. Click on the clipping mask, and what that does, it creates a little arrow which only affects the layer directly below. Okay, so if I play with these sliders now, it's only going to affect the texture and not her. However, because the texture is also on her, you will see a little bit of a color shift on her as well. Okay, But let's say, you know, we like the look of it, but we don't like that green. We can always desaturate, and, you know, we can actually, I'll go all the way to monochrome and just give it, you know, it's got the texture but not the color. Or we can desaturate a little bit, or we can even come up here to the hue and set, the hue slider, and actually change, you know, the color entirely, and then maybe lower the saturation a little bit. So it really, you have a lot of control over your texture. You don't have to be stuck with whatever color it is, okay? Another way to do it without using the clipping mask is you can, I'll just delete it for a second. You can be on your texture layer, and you can go up to image, and sorry, you probably can't see all of my menu, but image adjustments, and then you've got all these adjustments that apply to that layer you have selected. So I can go to hue saturation and do the same thing. I can desaturate. Now the only reason I may not like doing it this way as much is if I went overboard. Let's say I desaturated it all the way and hit OK. Now that layer is desaturated. I'm not sure if it'll come back. I don't know if I've ever tried it, but I can go back to adjustments, hue saturation. Yeah, and if I try to increase saturation, it's gone. It completely deleted that color. So a lot of times I prefer to do it with my layer adjustment tools up here, because then I can always go back and readjust if I want. In this case, I'd have to delete the layer and reapply that texture, unless I can undo it. You know, maybe I can do undo a few times, and and there we go. So yeah, if you have a history, you can bring it back that way too. So, but just to be safe, I usually like to use the adjustment layers here and use a clipping mask, because I can always go back and easily change it. Okay, so there's a couple of things there. Let me show you, you know, against a different background. Now, when somebody asked a question, hi Adrian, yeah, this will be recorded, so it should stay in the group later and you can rewatch it. I think somebody asked about trees. I think I lost the comment. How to add trees and things. So yeah, you can take a photograph and manipulate it to blend in, and it might take extra work, because if you just take a photo of a tree and try to put it in there, it might not fit very well, especially if you're wanting it to look very painterly. So you might have to work on that tree image first and maybe soften it, lower the contrast, maybe use a little blur on it. You might want to blur it out a little bit so it's not so sharp. And then try placing it in, and then lowering the opacity and playing with it. And then I always would add other textures on top of that so that everything's tied together. Okay, so like if I were to add a tree image here, I would do that first. Of course, adjust the tree image first, lay it in here, and then on top of both her and the tree image, I would put in another like a texture like this, to tie it all in together so that it kind of all goes. Oh yeah, how can you add a texture like trees or clouds and keep it natural? Yeah, just kind of how I explained. I mean, I don't think I have time to go through how to like, because you really have to manipulate the image first to make it look natural. But there are ways you can, and if you want it to look more like a painting, you can download images of paintings that are royalty free, you know, and use the same method. You just lower the opacity, you know, play with the blending modes. And again, like I said, you want to lay another texture on top of it to really tie it all together. And also your color toning. So, you know, you want to use, if you use exposure software to color tone, or even your own color toning with selective color, you know, you can go in here and kind of play with your colors to color tone. You know, in this case, because my texture was a little green, gave it a little bit of a green cast. I might want to come into selective color and remove some cyan. It would affect the background a little bit, but it's going to affect her the most. We're adding some red on her if we want to make her a little more red again. So yeah, you can, I recommend playing with that at the end to really tie everything together and make it look the way you want it to. Okay, so let's move on to another image just to have some variety here of backgrounds. So this one has what's called a gold seamless canvas background, and it's kind of a beigeish gold color. And there again, there's just a little bit of editing to the image, just skin retouching and some dodge and burn, and pretty basic. I didn't add any textures or anything to this yet. So even though that background is a painted canvas and it's got some little color variations you'll see there, maybe we want to add a texture in addition to make it more interesting or make it look more painterly. So I'm going to go to my textures here and see what we can use. How about like some clouds? Let's see. Not sure. And again, I just kind of look and see what I think might fit. I don't know, let's go with this one. Let's just see how this might look. I'm just gonna increase the size a little bit. I'm sorry, my Photoshop is slow. Uh-oh, hopefully it's not gonna lock up on me. Okay, here we go. It's really working hard. I can hear the fan just going. Okay, so I want to size it more or less, give it a little bit of space. I'm going to hit enter. And I'm going to, again, my go-to is usually soft light. I'm going to try that first. And I like that. It is giving, because this texture has a little bit of an orangish tinge to it, it's adding more of that color onto her. And, I may not want that. So first of all, maybe I can play with the color of the texture a little bit. So I can even come in here to selective color and use a clipping mask to just affect the texture and play around and see if it does anything. So if I increase cyan, it's removing some of that redness, which is, I kind of like that. Some of these may not make much of a difference. So I'm just kind of playing around. Now I do like this. Do you see in the dark shadowy areas here, when I select black and I change, it's changing those darks. I really like the more cyan tones, so I'm going to increase some cyan. That's kind of interesting. So again, I'm just playing around, seeing what may work, what might not work. That didn't do much. So if I turn this off and on, we can see a little color shift. It's a little less red, and I kind of like that. And the texture itself, if I want to desaturate it a little bit, I could always come in here with the hue saturation layer. It already gave me a clipping mask because it was just below this one. And maybe I want to desaturate it just a touch. That way it's not affecting the entire color as much. Okay, so again, if I want to take it off of her, now in some cases I might leave the texture on my subject. It just depends on what I'm wanting to accomplish and if it fits. So I'm going to zoom in, because sometimes textures have, you know, obviously different lines and textures, and if it's affecting your subject, you may not like it. So there's a little bit on her. What I could do is maybe I want to take the texture just off of her face and her skin. And again, a couple ways I can do that is to use a layer mask and brush it off if I want to. But again, we have to be aware that if I brush it off of her, whatever color cast that texture gave the image, there's going to be a disconnect between her skin and that background texture. And you know what textures do, or what they can do, is tie the whole image together so the color tone matches. So instead, I'm going to take my lasso tool at 20 pixels, or feathering at 20 pixels, and I'm going to just select the areas of her skin. And again, it doesn't have to be like super precise, but if you get it close, it's good. And then we've got a little bit back here between our fingers that we don't want it to affect, so I'm going to hit the Option key, and I'm just going to just roughly go and deselect those areas so that they're not affected. Okay, and then I'm going to go up to Filter, Blur, Average. And it's very subtle, but it took the texture off of her skin, but we left it on the flowers and on her dress. So if we turn this off and on, you'll see that there's some texture on her dress and the flowers. You can't really tell, it's very subtle, but it's there. And if we zoom in, you can see that texture on the flowers. It gives it a really nice soft painterly look. And then again, I can play around with the opacity. I can lower it a little bit. You know, again, I don't tend to use my textures at 100%. You know, the other thing we can do with textures is we can even add a blur. Like if it's a cool texture, but it's almost too crisp and too sharp, we can always add a Gaussian blur or a lens blur to it. So let's try it with this one. I'm going to go ahead and bring it back up to 100 so we can see what we're looking at. So while your selection is on that layer, I can go up to Filter, Blur, and I can select either, usually I go with lens blur if I'm going to do a background blur like that. And sorry, my computer's going to be slow. But it's showing her outline because we did that average blur earlier, but this shouldn't mess anything up. So right here, the radius this is where we adjust the amount of blur we want on that texture. Okay, so and this just all depends on how much blur you want. Usually I don't go overboard. If it's too much, then there's a disconnect between the background and the foreground. So maybe just a little bit of a blur, just to make it subtle. Let's try that. And there, you know, if you blinked, you missed it. It's really subtle, that blur, and I can't really undo it now. But there is a little bit more blur on that texture. If you want to blur it even more, go for it. So again, you have a lot of control over your textures. You can really change them. Okay, I can make this completely monochrome if I want. I can change the blend mode, see what might work. Now in this case, I don't think overlay looks as good. Soft light usually works the best. And then we can always stack textures too. So let's find another texture that maybe I want to add to the whole thing. So what works really well is like textures of fabrics. Here's a fabric texture. I can lay this on top. Size it here because it has a slight vignette, which I like. Okay, and then I'm going to change the blend mode again to probably soft light. Overlay is too harsh, so let's go with soft light. And I'm going to lower the opacity. Now in this case, maybe I do want to leave it on her because I want it to look like a painting. So if we zoom in, oh, hold on, I'm locked again. There we go. So see, if we zoom in, we've got that really cool texture on her. You can lower the opacity and see, you can see that slight texture. Now what we could do is, let's say I want the texture all over the entire image, but on her specifically, maybe I want it to be just a little bit less. Because on the background, I might want a really strong texture. So if I were to bring the opacity up a bit, and I'm like, oh, I really love that texture, but it's too much on her skin, I can pretty much do what I just did with the cloud. Hold on a second. Okay, so I'm going to grab the lasso tool, 20 pixels, and I'm going to, let's say I just want it to affect her skin again. So I'm going to select her skin, and again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but get it as close as you can. And then I'm going to deselect these little areas back here because that's the actual background. Okay, and I'm going to come up to filter, fade, or I'm sorry, filter, blur, average. I'm going to do that first, okay? Now, when I do that, it took all the texture off of her, but I want a little bit left on her. So I'm going to immediately, before I hit any other keys, go up to Edit, Fade Average, and then I'm going to bring some of that texture back onto her skin. And it's kind of hard to see, but 50% obviously would be half of the texture would be back on her skin, or 50% would be off. And if I go to 60%, then 60% of the texture would be off, and she would have 40% left on her skin. So, you just play with that, and I'm just going to say 60%. So she has 40% of the texture is on her face, and 100% obviously is everywhere else, okay? So I'm going to hit OK, Command D to get rid of my marching ants. Okay, so if I zoom in, now, if you look, her face has some texture, but it's not as strong as, back here in the background, okay? And it's going to fade because we had a 20 pixel feather on that lasso tool, so it's going to kind of, and you can make that feathering a little bit bigger if you want, but it's going to, it's going to feather that fade a little bit, so it just looks nice, and there's not like a hard line from where the texture was, at 40% and then 100%. Okay. So that gives, a more painterly look. And then of course, I usually add my textures towards the end of my edits. I might again play around with the overall opacity a little bit more. But yeah, like to finalize an image, maybe I want to add a vignette or something like that. So thanks, Constance. I'm going to Command Option Shift E, which is going to merge my layers visible, but it's not going to flatten my image because I want to see my layers. Maybe I want to add a vignette to kind of finalize this image. So I'm going to go up to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and let's see, it is somewhere down here in Effects. I'm going to add a vignette. So there used to be more control over the vignette itself. Oh, here it is. Oh, sorry, somebody's calling. Yeah, so right here, if you use this little arrow and open it, you have a little bit more control over your vignette. So you can open up, open and close the midpoint of where the vignette comes in, the roundness or the squareness of the vignette, the feathering of the vignette. And if you want it really, that usually doesn't look good, but if you want to really feather it and soften it. So yeah, so I like to come in here and play around with that. And again, I don't like real heavy vignettes. That just doesn't look right. But a soft, subtle vignette looks really nice in most images, maybe not all, but There we go, there's a vignette. Okay, so yeah, that's how you can use textures. Let's go to, we have a little bit more time. I'm gonna just try another image. Here's another image with a gray background. It's slightly lighter in color than the ballerina. So let's see what we can get with this. Some of these monochrome textures I have are nice, like these grunge walls. They look pretty good on against gray. So let's try this old wall texture. Just give it a little more interest rather than just gray seamless paper. Okay. And I'm going to, again, change this to soft light. That's usually my go-to. I can try overlay. Overlay is just higher contrast, and I don't care to go that way. So I'm going to go with soft light. So again, in this case, it wouldn't matter if we used a black brush to erase it off of her because it's a monochrome texture. It's not going to affect her color at all. So I can put in a layer mask and I can just paint it off of her real quickly. And that's usually a quick way to go. And if I want, I can paint it off the chair, which might make sense if it's a wall. We don't need it on the chair. And the hair, it's okay if it's not like a perfect exact, like every single hair up there, because we're going to lower the opacity anyway. So on a monochrome texture, you can use this method pretty easily too. But again, you want to watch for halos, you know, around the edges. So like right here, see we took some off back here. So what we might want to do is harden our brush a little bit and come back and paint it back in. And then go back around on her skin. Okay, and again, I'm not going to use this at 100%. To me, it looks kind of, I mean, it looks okay, but but I'm always going to lower the opacity just a little bit. And to me, that background is a little bright. And I know it kind of was to begin with, but what we can do, is we can, you know, lower the, you know, bring in the curves layer and darken that a little bit. Now, one way we can do that, and it can be easy now because we already have a mask where we masked her out. So what I can do is use a curves layer, and I can lower the highlights overall, okay? And then what I can do is use the Option key on my Mac, or I think it's probably Alt on a PC, and you grab the layer mask and you drag it up to the curves, to the curves layer. It's not working here. There it goes. Replace layer mask, say yes. And now we got an instant layer mask that just affects the background. Okay, so I can come back in here and mess around with the background again. Now, it may not be perfect because see, there's this little bit of a halo because of how we masked her out. You have to be careful with that. But if it's subtle, if it's a little bit, you may not notice it. But to be more precise, to get a better layer mask by masking her out, is by using the object selection tool and then doing it that way rather than erasing. Okay, so you could do that too. And I can show you that again as well, if you like. Let's see, maybe I'll delete these real quick. And then on this layer, I'm going to use the object select tool, select object. Now, in this case, it did grab some of the chair. So I'm going to select and mask, and then there's a way to get the color, and I can't remember how to do that. Is it this one? Show edge, show original. Maybe somebody can tell me real quick. Because I just upgraded to Photoshop 2021, and it kind of messed up some of my settings. But there's a way to make it so that you can see the mask color, which would be usually red. And I forgot how to do that. I'll have to figure it out. Anyway, so in this case, what we can do is just say output to we can output to a layer mask and hit OK. Okay, so here we've got the layer mask of her masked out. Okay, and then we can come back. Let me take away. Sorry, I hope I'm not confusing you guys. So I deleted the layer mask of the texture. So now let's pretend we just put the texture on. Okay, now instead of erasing it off of her, I can use the Option key. Yeah, I did, Donna Maria. I hit the / and it didn't work. So I'll have to do that again. And then drag this up and then invert it. Okay, now we have a pretty clean layer mask that Photoshop selected for us. However, remember earlier it picks out some of the chair. So with the black brush, I need to come back and just clean it. Oh, there it goes. Well, it worked here. It works here, but when you're in the mask, there's something else you have to hit. But anyway, so yeah, so now we can mask out the chair. Okay, so it's pretty good. And then, yep, so now we have her selected more precisely for our texture. Okay, and then again, if I want to make this texture a little darker or make that background a little darker, I can use the curves layer, bring down the highlights, and then drag up that layer mask so that it's only affecting the background now. And now we don't have to worry about that halo because we didn't mask it out ourselves with a soft brush and having to worry about that. Okay, so I would take advantage of this object select tool. It's really handy and it's really nice. So in this case, if we want to stack another layer or another mask, we can do that. Let's see if there's anything else I want to try. Let's just say, no, we don't like that. Let's try something else. We could quickly add another layer mask, or I'm sorry, another texture. Change it to soft light. And let's say, you know, let's try both, or let's turn off that first one and see how this one looks. And then I can drag this layer mask up and very quickly mask her out. And then we've got another, you know, a different texture, or we can use them both and see how they look together. I don't know, kind of looks cool. So yeah, so there's all kinds of cool stuff you can do. All right, we only have a few more minutes. I've got one last image here. This one's the brightest of all the images, so you know, any textures we use, it's gonna, you know, look a little different. So let's try something else here with maybe some color. Let's try, kind of like this. Is it this one, Roman Lines, or the Rust? Let's try Rust 2. This has some texture and color. Let's see what that does. And we'll change this to soft light. in this case, you could play around with some other blending modes because it's a lighter color overall, but I still think soft light might be the one. You could even try multiply. It darkens it. Let's see. That is kind of cool, actually. So with multiply, it darkened our image a bit. And we can do the same thing as before. We can use the lasso tool to, because there's color now on this texture, if we want that overall color to stay on our subject as well, that's the best way to do it, is to use the lasso tool and to, more or less with the hair, it's not going to be that important to get all the little hairs. And there's a tiny area here. I don't know if that's going to make a big difference, but we're going to go to filter, blur, average. And there it is. And see how it darkened the image overall, because we used the multiply blend mode, because that darkens. And that looks actually kind of cool. And then if we lower the opacity, we get a little bit less of an effect. We can try overlay. Actually looks kind of neat as well. Oops, let's try that. And just lower the opacity a little more. It's kind of a neat effect. And then we can stack some textures. Let's try maybe had a fabric here. Let's try that same one I did on the other girl. Fabric texture on top of it. Whoops. Yeah, somebody asked about a halo. That you have to create that with the elliptical tool. At some point, I can make a tutorial for that. Okay, so with this, I'm going to change this. Maybe let's try screen. Screen mode will brighten. And if you want like a real soft, maybe a soft look, screen mode can do that, soft and bright. So we've got some texture on her in the background. We can use the same methods as before to take it off of her if we want. So yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of playing. Does anybody have any questions before I sign off? Let's try. Let's add some sky on here too. See how that looks. Oh, hey, Kate. I didn't know you were here. Maybe I'll, and you don't have to cover the whole image with the texture. So like in this case with the clouds, I can put in a layer mask and then, and I can erase, like softly erase the line so you don't see it. So maybe with a lower opacity and lower flow with a soft brush, I can erase this line so that it starts to blend more naturally. I can increase that a little bit. Yeah, so now I've got two textures. They almost, they blend in pretty well together, but if I turn this off, now I've got some clouds up above and not below, and then maybe, we can add something different. So you can do that too. So yeah, I don't feel like you have to use the whole texture on the image. You can use parts of the texture as long as you softly erase and blend it in where it looks right, you'll be fine. Yeah, so this one, I can actually, maybe I can just erase part of the top of this one since I have the clouds there if I want. Maybe just take it back a little bit. So yeah, you can do all kinds of fun things. Anyway, it's about time here. So if anybody has any questions, Yeah, somebody it's deciding which blend mode to use is the hardest part. And it can be, I mean, you can sit there and go back and forth for a while and to try and figure out what would fit the best. Yeah, it's just a matter of playing, and you'll eventually start to get used to, you know, maybe one blend mode that really fits the best. You know, like I said, usually I go with soft light, and then I might just real quickly go through some of the other ones to see, hey, this might work better. I'll do that. Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions? Oh, and I just wanted to let you know that I do have 3 texture packs available in the shop for right now. They are, a couple are on sale, and then and I do have one-on-one online classes that are currently 15% off until tomorrow, end of October. So I have 2-hour and 4-hour online classes. Of course, anybody can get more hours if they needed, but usually you learn a lot in 2 hours and 4 hours especially. So if that's of interest to you, or, you know, I can teach you basically from raw all the way to an edited image, how that process looks. Just let me know if you're interested. Also, Flypaper Textures they make great textures, and I'll put a link in the group if you're ever interested in checking their textures out. But other than that, I hope you guys learned a little bit, and yeah, thanks. I hope it was helpful, and shoot me any other questions that you might have, and I will post this video. It should stay in the group later. Iris, the cloud overlays are in my, if you just go to barbaramcferrin.com under shop, you'll see my textures there, and I can send the link in here as well. So, okay guys, thanks for joining, and please let me know if you have any questions, how I can help. And I know sometimes I'm not around. If you tag me in the group, I'm more likely to answer if I get a tag, because sometimes I miss a lot of things that go through the group. So anyway, I hope you guys thanks guys, you're welcome. Hope you had fun, and have a great weekend, and happy Halloween if you celebrate. My daughter's really ready to, I don't know if we're gonna be able to trick or treat because of COVID, obviously, but we have a little surprise like game to do with her for trick or treat. So I think she'll still have fun even if we can't go trick or treating. So anyway, thanks guys. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.